The Akinwunmi street. If you've never heard of it, let me tell you. It's one of those streets that seem alive, full of colour, scent and sound. In Lagos, where everything moves fast and time seems to chase us, Akinwunmi has its own rhythm. It's a place where everyone knows their neighbour's name, where children run barefoot and laughing, while mothers gossip about the latest soap opera near the fruit stalls. Now let me introduce you to some faces that make the street what it is. First, Adebayo. A young man with curious eyes, always riding his rusty bike through the alleyways. He's a delivery guy, but his real skill is observing. Nothing escapes his notice, and they say he knows more neighbourhood secrets than anyone else. Maybe that's true. Then Mama Funmi, the grande dame of Akinwunmi Street. She runs a food stall famous all over the neighbourhood. The smell of jollofi, rice and charcoal grilled meat, invites anyone passing by to stop. Everyone says no one cooks like she does. And Mama Funmi knows it, with the air of someone holding a secret no one will ever uncover. Life on Akinwunmi follows an almost choreographed routine. In the morning, the women set up their stalls, the bread vendors shout as they pass, and the boys play football with balls made of socks. In the afternoon, the sun's heat makes everyone seek the shade of trees, and at night, kerosene lamps light the way while laughter and stories echo. That month, though, something was different. It's hard to explain with words, but those who lived there noticed that the street was uneasy. The dogs barked louder than usual, the wind brought a strange smell, and even the trees seemed to whisper secrets. Adebayo was the first to notice. He said, "Akinwunmi is different, something is changing." But who listens to a boy? Maybe it was just coincidence, but the elders often say that when everything seems too calm, you need to stay alert. That late afternoon, with the sky tinged in orange and purple, the air in Akinwunmi seemed to carry a warning. Get ready, something important is about to happen. The first signs of change on Akinwunmi Street came like a whisper, almost imperceptible, but the sharp-eyed always catch what the distracted miss. Baba Tunde's dogs, for example, started behaving strangely. Baba Tunde is known for his dogs. They are strong, loyal, and generally calm. But suddenly, every time Mama Funmi or anyone from her family passed by, the animals became restless. Loud barks, bared teeth, growls that made even the bravest hesitate before getting too close. Residents of Akinwunmi were puzzled. It wasn't common for Baba Tunde's dogs to behave like that, especially with a family as respected as Mama Funmi's. At first, no one said anything. Maybe it's just the heat making the dogs agitated, some would say. But the unease began to grow like a slow shadow, spreading throughout the community. Adebayo, always curious, couldn't help but notice. He saw that Mama Funmi's family was acting strangely. Normally, the stall was a meeting point, with people coming and going, sharing stories while they waited for their meals. But lately, Mama Funmi and her family seemed to avoid contact with the neighbours. The interactions were brief, almost mechanical, as if they were in a hurry to finish each conversation. Moreover, there was something about the way they were living. Adebayo noticed that the stall, which used to be welcoming and open, had changed. A thick tarp now covered the sides, and the makeshift windows that once let in light were now shut. It was as if they wanted to hide from the world. Rumours began to spread. On Akinwunmi Street, as in any community, gossip is like the wind, impossible to contain. Some said Mama Funmi had uncovered a dangerous secret. Others, more superstitious, believed the family was involved with something supernatural. "Maybe they offended some forest spirit," one of the women in the breadline whispered. Baba Tunde, ever observant, told Adebayo about his dog's behaviour. "It's not normal," he said, scratching his grey beard. "My dogs sense things. We don't see. They know when something's wrong, and those barks, boy, are a warning." Chika, a friend of Adebayo, seemed to know more than she let on. When he tried to talk about Mama Funmi, she looked away. "You shouldn't get involved in this, Adebayo." That was all she said, with a tone that mixed fear and concern. These signs, small to those who weren't paying attention, were impossible to ignore for Adebayo. He felt that something was coming, something bigger than anyone could imagine. And while Akinwunmi Street continued with its apparent routine, a mystery was forming like dark clouds before a storm. On Akinwunmi Street, rumours spread faster than the scent of Mama Funmi's jollof rice. The strange behaviour of the family, the relentless barking of Baba Tunde's dogs, the closed windows, all of it was like firewood thrown onto a fire that was already beginning to crackle. And when there's a fire, there are always those willing to blow on it to see how far the flames can go. Neighbours began whispering on corners, during shopping trips, or while waiting in the water line. Small details turned into big stories in people's mouths. "I heard Mama Funmi doesn't sleep at night. She walks back and forth in the stall," one woman said once. "And did you see her children? Always so quiet, staring at the ground, like they know something they don't want to tell," another added. But it wasn't just gossip about strange behaviour. Some residents began sharing more intriguing theories. "You know, there are old stories about families making pacts with spirits to prosper," said Baba Sola, the cobbler, while mending a shoe on the sidewalk. "Maybe that's it. Baba Tunde's dogs smell something that's not of this world." Adebayo, with his innate curiosity, couldn't just ignore what was happening. He had the ability to listen without seeming like he was paying attention, to blend into conversations without being noticed. That's how he heard many of these stories, one more fanciful than the other. But there was one thing he knew: where there's smoke, there's fire. And he wanted to understand what the truth behind that mystery was. Determined to investigate, Adebayo began talking to the neighbours. Baba Tunde, always willing to share his wisdom, was the first he spoke to. "Adebayo, smart boy, listen to what I'm telling you. Dogs don't bark for nothing. They know when there's danger. And danger is what this street is smelling of," the man said, his eyes fixed on the boy. "If I were you, I'd leave it alone. Not everything you investigate is safe." But Adebayo wasn't the type to back down. He knew that Chika, his childhood friend, might know something more. When he found her in the shade of a mango tree, where she used to sew, he tried to bring it up. "Chika, what do you think of all this about Mama Funmi and her family? Everyone's talking." Chika sighed and lowered her head, hesitating before answering. "Adebayo, you should forget about this. Sometimes it's better not to know certain things. I heard my grandmother say that there are forces that prefer to stay hidden. Messing with them can bring trouble for everyone. But you know something, don't you?" he pressed. Chika just shook her head, as if fighting something inside her. "I know what people say, that's it. But be careful, Adebayo. Curiosity can be dangerous." Meanwhile, the rumours kept growing. Some said Mama Funmi's family had brought something from another place, something that didn't belong to Akinwunmi Street. Others believed they were hiding a secret from the past, something dark that was finally coming to light. And there were those who swore they'd heard whispers coming from the stall at night, whispers that didn't sound human. Adebayo began paying more attention to Mama Funmi's stall. He noticed that while other residents left their doors open to let in the fresh air, the family's stall remained closed like a fortress. Sometimes he'd see a strange glow coming from the gaps in the tarp at night, as if something was being done inside, something no one should see. Days passed, and the unease on Akinwunmi Street grew. The atmosphere felt heavy, and even the everyday sounds seemed muffled. Adebayo knew he was facing something big, something that could change everything he knew about his community. He also knew that, if he wanted to understand what was happening, he would have to dig deeper. And so, while the street continued to murmur its stories, Adebayo decided he needed to be more than a listener. He needed to be the storyteller. What he didn't know yet was that sometimes the answers we seek have the power to change us forever. Have you ever heard that nights carry secrets that the day never dares to reveal? Well, on that New Year's Eve, Akinwunmi Street seemed to have donned a cloak of mystery. The air was dense, heavy, as if the world were holding its breath. The colours of twilight dissolved into a deep blue sky, and the moon, which should have been shining sovereign, appeared pale, almost shy, behind dark clouds. Mama Funmi's stall, which usually closed early, remained open that night. For many, that was enough to raise suspicions. Mama Funmi was never one to disregard traditions. On New Year's Eve, families gathered at home to pray, sing, and wait for the first day of the new cycle. So why was the stall still lit? Why did the smells of spices and hot oil continue to spread through the street, even when silence had taken over the other homes? Adebayo noticed this immediately. He was sitting on the small wooden bench in front of Babatunde's house, watching the street as he always did. But that night, something was different. Babatunde's dogs, who had spent weeks barking furiously every time someone from Mama Funmi's family passed, were now strangely silent. They didn't growl, didn't move. They just stared fixedly at the stall, ears drooped and tails still, as if they had given up fighting against something they couldn't understand. "You see that, Babatunde?" Adebayo asked, pointing to the dogs. The old cobbler, sitting in his rocking chair, just shook his head. "When even the dogs go quiet, boy, it's because the night has decided no one should speak." Adebayo felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't one to get easily scared, but that night had something that made even the bravest hesitate. He tried not to think too much about it, but his eyes kept drifting back to the stall. The tarp that covered the sides fluttered lightly with. The wind and the lantern light cast dancing shadows, creating shapes that seemed to have a life of their own. Then, something happened. It was almost midnight when Adebayo saw a strange movement. He could have sworn he saw someone leave Mama Funmi's stall, but it wasn't as if the person just walked out. It was quick, almost like a shadow sliding along the ground. He blinked, trying to focus, but whatever it was had already disappeared. Meanwhile, other residents began noticing the strange vibration in the air. The atmosphere on Akinwunmi Street was different. There were no laughs, no voices singing to celebrate the new year. Even the children, who usually set off fireworks, were inside, as if they sensed that something bigger than them was happening, outside. From inside the stall, muffled voices could be heard. They weren't the cheerful, warm voices the neighbours were used to hearing from Mama Funmi and her family. They were murmurs, deep, almost like chants. They sounded like a prayer, but not in a language anyone on the street recognised. Adebayo held his breath. He felt the urge to get closer, but something inside him, perhaps an ancestral instinct, held him in place. "Boy, watch where you step," Babatunde said, without even looking at him. "There are nights that aren't ours, and this is one of them." When the church clock at the end of the street struck midnight, an absolute silence fell over Akinwunmi Street. Even the wind seemed to dare not move. The lanterns in Mama Funmi's stall suddenly went out, as if someone had blown them all out at once. Adebayo felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to run over there, wanted to understand what was happening, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the moonlight finally broke through, the clouds illuminating the street. Mama Funmi's stall was there, still, dark, as if abandoned. But there was something in the air, a smell. It wasn't the usual aroma of Mama Funmi's dishes, but something metallic, almost like blood mixed with wet earth. Adebayo couldn't explain it, but he knew something very important had just happened. That night on Akinwunmi Street would not be forgotten. Adebayo was sure of it, and yet he knew it was just the beginning. Something had been awakened, something that would change everything. The mystery was no longer just about Mama Funmi and her family, but about the very essence of the street, the community, the connection between the world we know and the secrets we prefer to ignore. On that New Year's Eve, Akinwunmi Street had become a different place. A place where the whispers of shadows began telling stories that even the oldest ones could not comprehend. The next morning, the sun rose lazily over Akinwunmi Street, as if even it hesitated to illuminate what had happened during the night. The first rays filtered through the trees, but they didn't bring the usual energy of a new day. It was as if an invisible cloud hung over the community, and indeed it did. As the residents began to leave their homes, it didn't take long for them to realise that something was terribly wrong. Mama Funmi's stall was empty. Not empty in the usual sense, like when she closed for the day and packed up her utensils. No, this time it was completely vacant, as if it had never been there. Not a single pot, not a single chair, not even the colourful cloths that usually decorated the space. The worn tarp that had covered the stall was gone, and the ground where it stood seemed unnaturally clean, as if someone had carefully erased all traces of its presence. Adebayo was the first to notice. He had woken up early, troubled by the restlessness he felt the night before. When he approached the stall and saw the empty space, his heart began to race. He looked around, searching for any sign of Mama Funmi's family, but there was no one. Only the heavy silence of the morning. Little by little the other residents started leaving their homes. First came the children, drawn by curiosity, then the adults with suspicious glances and cautious steps. Soon, a small crowd gathered around the spot where the stall had been. "They're gone," said one woman, breaking the silence. Her voice was filled with uncertainty. "But how? All of this in one night? And why didn't anyone hear anything?" asked another, crossing her arms. "How is it possible to take down an entire stall and disappear without making a sound?" Baba Tunde, who always seemed to have an answer for everything, was quiet this time. He looked at the empty space with a serious, almost sombre expression. The dogs, usually restless, were lying next to him in complete silence, as if sharing the weight of that morning. And then the speculation began. Some said that Mama Funmi and her family had fled, perhaps because of the gossip circulating about them. Others believed something darker was at play. "Don't you remember the chants we heard last night?" asked a young man. "And the strange smell in the air? This isn't the work of ordinary people." "Maybe they were spirits," suggested an older woman, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Spirits that lived among us, but now they've decided to leave." Adebayo listened to it all in silence, but his mind was racing. He knew there was something that didn't make sense. Even if they were spirits, as some claimed, why leave everything so clean? Why erase all the traces? He looked at the ground where the stall had been, and noticed something the others hadn't: strange marks on the ground. They were like lines, almost drawn, forming an unusual pattern. "Baba Tunde," he called, pointing at the ground. "Look at this. What do you think it means?" The old man approached and examined the marks, frowning. He didn't respond right. Away. But his eyes darkened as if he were remembering something distant, something he preferred not to bring up. "They're symbols," he finally said, his voice low and grave. "They're not ordinary drawings. This is old, boy. Very old." The other residents gathered around, forming a circle around the marks. The murmur of voices grew. Some said the symbols were some kind of spell. Others believed they were a warning, but no one knew for sure. Even Baba Tunde, with all his wisdom, seemed hesitant to offer a definitive explanation. Meanwhile, Adebayo felt an increasing sense of unease. He knew those marks were important, but he didn't know what to do with that information. Something inside him told him that the mystery of Mama Funmi's family was far from over. "They didn't leave willingly," said Chika, who had been silent until then. Her voice was firm, but there was a hint of fear in her tone. "They were taken, or they hid." Everyone's eyes turned to her. "Hid from what?" someone asked. Chika shook her head, as if she were battling something inside her. "My grandmother used to tell stories about portals, places where our world and other worlds meet. These places are dangerous because they can open, and when that happens, bad things can happen. I think Mama Funmi knew this. I think she was protecting something. And, last night, something changed." Chika's words hung in the air like a storm about to break. No one knew what to say. Even Adebayo, who always had questions, fell silent. He looked again at the marks on the ground, and knew, at that moment, that his life would never be the same. Akinwunmi Street, which once seemed like an ordinary place, was now shrouded in mystery. Mama Funmi's empty stall would become a legend. But for Adebayo, that wasn't just a story to be told. It was the beginning of something much larger, something he still couldn't understand. And, though he didn't know it yet, he felt that his journey was just beginning. Let me tell you what happened after that strange morning when Akinwunmi Street awoke to a mystery that no one seemed able to solve. Adebayo, the curious and determined young man, couldn't simply accept the silence or the simplistic explanations the others offered. He felt that there was something greater, something hidden in the corners of the story that no one dared to explore. And like a river that refuses to be contained, he began to follow the flow of his doubts, even if it led him to dangerous waters. Adebayo decided to begin his investigation where everything seemed to have ended, the empty space where Mama Funmi's stall had once stood. He returned there alone, while the sun was already high and the neighbours had dispersed, busy with their routines or perhaps simply trying to avoid thinking about the inexplicable. The ground still had the mysterious marks Baba Tunde had called ancient symbols, and Adebayo knelt down to observe them closely. The lines were precise, almost perfect, as if they had been engraved into the ground with a purpose. They didn't seem hand-drawn, at least not in the usual way. They formed patterns that seemed to move before his eyes, depending on the angle of his gaze. Adebayo felt a chill. It was as if those marks were alive, breathing along with the surroundings. As he examined the ground, something caught his attention, a small, shiny object partially buried in the earth. Carefully, he dug it up. It was a pendant hanging from a thin, worn cord. The pendant was shaped like a circle, with the same pattern engraved on it that he had seen on the ground. It looked old, but it also carried an energy, something Adebayo couldn't explain. He felt, deep in his chest, that this had not been left there by accident. With the pendant securely in his hand, Adebayo decided to seek answers. He knew Baba Tunde might have more to say, but the old cobbler was cautious. So Adebayo went to Chika, the young woman who seemed to know more than she revealed. He found her sitting beneath the large baobab tree in the centre of the street, where she usually spent her time in silence. "Chika," he began, showing her the pendant. "Do you know what this is?" She looked at the object in his hand, and immediately her expression changed. Her face, which usually carried an unshakable serenity, became tense. She looked around, ensuring no one was nearby, and then gestured for him to sit next to her. "Where did you get this?" she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. "I found it in the ground, near Mama Funmi's stall," Adebayo replied. "What does it mean?" Chika sighed, as if carrying the weight of a secret she didn't want to share, but knew she couldn't hide anymore. "My grandmother told me stories about an object like this. She said it was an amulet used by the guardians of portals. These portals connect our world to another, a place where things we don't understand live. The guardians were responsible for keeping the portals closed, protecting people from anything that tried to cross." Adebayo fell silent, absorbing her words. A portal. Guardians. This explained the strange chants, the reclusive behaviour of Mama Funmi's family, and perhaps even the sudden disappearance. "Do you think Mama Funmi was a guardian?" he asked. Chika hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "It's the only explanation that makes sense. They knew something we didn't, and last night something went wrong. The portal must have opened." "What happens when the portal opens?" Adebayo asked, even though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Chika looked at him with a serious expression. "It depends. Sometimes it just empties. But other times, things can cross. Things that don't belong in this world. Things that bring chaos." Adebayo felt a shiver run down his spine. "And where is Mama Funmi now? What happened to them?" "If they were really guardians," Chika said, "then they may have sacrificed themselves. The guardians have ways to protect themselves, to hide the portal or seal it again. But that always comes at a price." Adebayo tightened his grip on the pendant. He knew he couldn't leave it at that. If there was a portal on Akinwunmi Street, and if it was still open, then there was danger. Danger for everyone he knew and loved. And for some reason that he didn't fully understand yet, he felt connected to all of this. That night, Adebayo returned to the spot where the stall had been, with the pendant hanging around his neck. He wanted to understand more, to find more clues. He knelt down over the marks on the ground and tried to align them with the pattern of the pendant. To his surprise, when he held the pendant over the symbols, a faint blue light began to emanate from the object. It was weak, but unmistakable. Adebayo felt his heart race. He was dealing with something much bigger than he had imagined, but at the same time, he felt an unexpected courage. It was as if the pendant was giving him strength, or perhaps it was the weight of the responsibility he now felt. Akinwunmi Street was shrouded in mystery, but Adebayo knew he wasn't alone. He had the pendant, he had Chika's stories, and, above all, he had his determination, and although he still didn't know what awaited him, he was ready to move forward. Because sometimes, fate chooses those who least expect it, and Adebayo was beginning to understand that he had been chosen for something much greater. Let me tell you what happened to Adebayo after that night when the pendant shone for the first time. Something inside him awakened, something he didn't even know he had. But that's how it is with the chosen ones. Sometimes they need a push, from fate to see their role in the grand story. And for Adebayo, that pendant was both a key and a call. The next morning, as the sun gently kissed Akinwunmi Street, Adebayo returned to the spot where Mama Funmi's stall had disappeared. There was something calling to him, like a drum that only he could hear. He knew he had to continue investigating, even if he didn't fully understand what he was searching for. When he arrived at the site, the pendant around his neck began to warm slightly, pulsing as if it had a life of its own. He knelt once again on the ground, where the ancient symbols remained engraved. This time, however, something new happened. As the pendant approached the markings, one of the lines glowed, revealing something hidden beneath the earth. Adebayo began to dig with his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility with every move, and then he found something unexpected. A book. It wasn't large, but it looked ancient, with a worn leather cover and pages that seemed to have survived centuries. In the centre of the cover was the same symbol that was engraved on the pendant. It was as if the book and the pendant were part of the same puzzle. Adebayo felt a chill as he opened the first page. The letters were written in a language he didn't recognize, but somehow he understood the meaning. It was as if the words spoke directly to his mind, translating themselves into knowledge. The book wasn't just a record. It was a guide, a map to understand the mysteries surrounding Akinwunmi Street and perhaps the world beyond it. As he read, Adebayo uncovered the truth about Mama Funmi and her family. They were indeed guardians of an ancient portal, a point of connection between the world of the living and a dimension full of dangerous forces. The book explained that the portal had been sealed for generations by a lineage of chosen guardians, people who dedicated their lives to protecting others from unseen threats. But something had gone wrong. According to the book, the portal could only be opened on specific occasions when the two worlds were in alignment. This usually occurred during events marked by celestial cycles, such as New Year's Eve. Mama Funmi and her family, realizing the alignment was near, performed a ritual to reinforce the seal of the portal. However, the ritual failed. The book didn't explain exactly why, but it suggested that a greater force, something from the other side of the portal, had interfered. And then came the most unsettling part. The book said that when a portal is opened, it can only be closed by someone who shares the Guardian's lineage or has been chosen by forces beyond human comprehension. That was when Adebayo understood why the pendant had responded to him. Somehow, he was connected to this story, to this mission. Perhaps it was through his blood, perhaps it was fate. But the fact was, he now carried the responsibility of closing the portal before something worse happened. As he read further, Adebayo found detailed instructions on how to perform the closing ritual. It wouldn't be easy. He would need courage, concentration, and above all, faith in the unknown. The ritual involved using the pendant to activate the symbols on the ground and reciting ancient words that connected the Guardian's power to the portal. but there was a clear warning at the bottom of the page. Every guardian must pay a price. Adebayo closed the book, feeling the weight of the words. He knew this wasn't just about him, it was about Akinwunmi Street, about the people who lived there, their lives, their stories. He thought of Baba Tunde, with his noisy dogs, of Chika, who had guided him with her silent wisdom, and even the children who played barefoot in the dust. All those lives were at risk, and he was the only one who could protect them. He went home that night, but sleep did not come. The book lay by his side, like a silent companion, as he stared at the ceiling, thinking about what would come next. Deep down, he knew he couldn't wait much longer. The portal was open, and every moment of hesitation could mean danger for everyone. The next morning, Adebayo made a decision. He would seek out Chika again, for he felt she still had more to say. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could help him gather the courage he needed to face the unknown. Because though Adebayo was determined, he also knew that no hero walks alone. So he moved forward, with the book in one hand and the pendant around his neck, ready to face whatever came. And as he walked down the street, he felt the wind whisper, in his ears, as though the ancestors were by his side, guiding him. After all, Adebayo was no longer just a young delivery boy. He was now a guardian in training, and the fate of Akinwunmi Street depended on his courage. Minnie.